And I'd like to thank the Cordoba Foundation for arranging this amazing event and for the East London Mosque for hosting it. I congratulate you, and I congratulate everyone here tonight who have been contributing to what is a very powerful event. I've not heard many of the testimonies given tonight, but the few that I have really touch you in the soul, don't they? And why are we here? We're here because we want to send a simple message, and a simple message that should be shouted loud and clear throughout our country and the world, and that must be heard by China. And our message is this, that we will not stand silent whilst the Uyghur community remains subject to this terrible repression and persecution, all done to them simply because they want to practice their Muslim faith.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of our Lord Almighty, the most gracious, the most merciful. Brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, friends, Assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you all. At the very start of this event, we will begin with a recitation of the Holy Quran, and our reciter, our guest reciter today will be Sheikh Abdul Karim Zayyar, who's a Uyghur scholar and Imam.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم آمن الرسول بما أنزل إليه من ربه والمؤمنون كل آمن بالله وملائكته وكتبه ورسله لا نفرق بين أحد من رسله وقالوا سمعنا وأطعنا غفرانك ربنا وإليك المصير لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها لها ما كسبت وعليها ما اكتسبت ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا أو أخطأنا ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.
Good evening, and once again, Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you all, and thank you very much everyone for coming to this event tonight. My name is Anas Al-Tikriti. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Cordoba Foundation and the President of the Muslim Association of Britain. I have to apologize firsthand for my voice. I'm just about recovering from a bad chest, so I won't be doing my song session today. So firstly, I'd like to thank all our speakers for coming from all across the spectrum, concerned for the case of the Uyghur. This event tonight is timely and it's important. And throughout this evening, we will all hear from different perspectives in regards with this particular issue that will highlight something that is seldom talked about. In fact, for some very odd reason, almost never talked about. So today we'll try to highlight those perspectives. I'd like to thank the London Muslim Centre and the East London Mosque for hosting us once again. Whenever there is an issue such as this, of this magnitude, we always find this place to welcome us, and therefore our gratitude and appreciation go to everyone related to the London Muslim Centre. Also, I have to thank dozens of organizations, over 27 organizations that have officially supported this event, including think tanks, NGOs, community organizations, different ethnic background organizations and community groups, and campaigns. Also special thanks to the Muslim Council of Britain, the London Muslim Centre, International Observatory for Human Rights, and the Muslim Association of Britain for affording their support and co-organizing this event. I have to say I'm grateful to all the speakers that we're going to hear from tonight. Every one of them has given up their evening in order to talk about this issue, which we will hopefully come to appreciate how important, how immensely, immeasurably almost terrifying, happening whilst we are sitting here today, with very little mention on our mainstream media or by our politicians, bar a few, and a few of whom hopefully today we will hear from. Just a line or two about the Cordoba Foundation. We have recently celebrated our 14th anniversary. We were established in January of 2005. And the reason why the Cordoba Foundation was established was in order to try to understand the relationship between the West as a cultural, ideological, political construct and the Muslim world. Trying to understand exactly why that relationship blooms and flourishes at times and why it becomes tense and problematic at times. And trying to understand the underlying issues of this. This then morphed over the years, because of events happening, into conflict resolution, peace building, hostage negotiation, training and research and the such. And we're glad that today we continue our work in highlighting issues like this that are important not only because of the Uyghurs themselves, not only because of the Muslim community worldwide, but also because this pertains to who we are as human beings. And therefore it has immense impact on our being, on our status. And we will come to talk about the relationship, or probably why it is that such a case is happening, whilst very little is being said about it within the context of world politics today. You will all have on your seats a special edition of Insights, which is dedicated to the Uyghur crisis, and this serves as a fact sheet for all those who want to know more about this case. And in this context, we're grateful to Dr. Rachel Harris from SOAS, the University of London, who penned this article. Please, for all of those who are here representing your mosques or communities or the such, please feel free to take as many copies as you wish. Please just ask any of the stewards and they'll tell you how you can get hold of however much you need. And this is also available online in PDF form. We have several speakers. I'm counting about 9 or 10, and all come from different but very, very important and related perspectives. We are immensely pleased to have received confirmation from Emily Thornberry, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, who will be joining us after Isha prayers. Also, I'd like to thank all the media outlets who have joined us today, Islam Channel, Al Jazeera. We have the East London Mosque or London Muslim Centre YouTube channel, and many others, the journalists and authors and correspondents who are covering this event tonight. There will be donation boxes for those who wish to donate for the Uyghur case. And finally, all I am left to request is that you switch your mobile phones onto silent and hopefully enjoy this evening. We will try as much as possible to keep on time so that we can have also some discussion, Q&A sessions before Isha and before we conclude this evening. So without further ado, I would like to ask our first speaker, but also our host for tonight. I'd like to welcome Dilwar Khan, who is the Managing Director of the East London Mosque and the London Muslim Centre.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Thank you, Brother Anas, and thank you very much to everyone for coming to the East London Mosque. I'd like to formally welcome you to the East London Mosque and London Muslim Centre. I can see that there are many people in the audience who probably haven't been here before. Just for your benefit, I'll just give a little bit of an introduction to the centre and the mosque, and then I'll conclude. Our mosque we claim that it's the first mosque of London. The journey started in 1910, so we are almost 109 years old. We have 4 buildings in this complex. We have the East London Mosque and the London Muslim Centre and the Mariam Centre, and the latest addition to our complex is there was a synagogue building in between our mosque, and it's part of the centre now. So we provide a range of services from these 3 buildings: religious, educational, social welfare, and community cohesion services from these 4 buildings. Alhamdulillah, we've been hosting this kind of events for a long time, especially those people who have been persecuted around the world. We've held many meetings here regarding the issues in Palestine, during the time of the Bosnian War, the anti-war, the war in Iraq, and most recently the situation in Myanmar about the Rohingya Muslims. We held several meetings here. And tonight we are honored to host this event about the situation of our Muslim brothers and sisters in China, the Uyghur Muslims, who have been persecuted for 70 years. Unfortunately, as Brother Anas said, that many of us are not aware of the situation because it is hardly mentioned in the media. It's only recently that we've seen there was a BBC news coverage and some other media actually highlighted this issue. So we hope that tonight many of us will go away with more understanding of the situation, what's happening there, and more importantly, what we should do and what we can do about our brothers and sisters in China. So with these few words, I'd like to welcome you again to the London Muslim Centre, East London Mosque. I hope that you will learn about the situation, and inshallah, all of us together, we can do something about this situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dilwar. Our first speaker for today is Professor Paul Reynolds. And Paul is a foreign policy and international economics specialist, having worked in over 70 countries around the world. Formerly with the Central Party School in Beijing, he advises opposition groups in countries facing Chinese-influenced human rights abuses. He's going to talk for about approximately 8 to 10 minutes on Chinese policy towards the Uyghur Muslims. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much all of you for coming here this evening. I hope you find it interesting. My name is Paul Reynolds, and I work in international relations and economics, and I've worked in all parts of China and Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan and Mongolia and Dushanbe and Afghanistan and all the countries that surround Xinjiang province. So I'm going to say something about China policy. I won't go into the detail of the oppressions. There are others that will be dealing with that. So I'll just deal with that specifically, and then we can go on to the detail of the Chinese Communist Party oppression of Uyghur Muslims. And I've got just a few quick points to make in a short space of time. One is I want to say that Xinjiang province it's a colonial project of the People's Republic of China. And if you look at the question from a kind of Beijing perspective, it kind of brings a particular understanding of the psychology and mentality of what's leading to the terrible treatment and incarcerations of people of Muslim faith and people of Uyghur ethnicity. I mean, the colonization goes back to the Han Dynasty of 200 BC, and there was a period of disintegration followed by the Tang Dynasty, which had a war with the Turkic Khaganates from the north, and then there was the Qing Dynasty, and which then turned into, after the warlord period and World War II and Japanese occupation, and it turned into what you might say the Communist Party dynasty, which then pursued its imperial traditions as it saw them, and in so doing kind of harked back to the golden years of Chinese occupation of the Central Asian part of what is now China. And we have to remember, in the sense of it being a colonial project, that the name of the province is New Frontier. So it's a kind of colonial view, and the borders of the province were drawn by the Chinese colonialists. No different really from Sykes-Picot in the way that the Middle Eastern borders were drawn by the European powers, similarly in Africa. So it's a colonial project and should be seen as such, and it will remain so. Very briefly, I want to say that there are three main policy factors behind the Chinese government's behavior with the Uyghur Muslim population. I mean, one is since Xi Jinping came to power, oppression has somewhat increased. And in his broader project, he sees key vulnerabilities and difficulties for the Communist Party in order to stay in power. And he focuses on the need for growth to keep the population happy. And behind the scenes, he wishes to address a number of vulnerabilities in his approach. In particular, energy shortages, the possibility of a blockade, for example, if there's a war involving Taiwan, for example. And they are also, in Beijing, very concerned about the US economy, in particular its debt and the role of the dollar, and they've got a lot of dollar holdings. So they have these views of vulnerability. And in order to deal with some of those vulnerabilities, he has promoted this thing which everyone calls the One Belt, One Road initiative, which is pushing Chinese economic reach across the landmass, as well as through maritime trade. Some of you may have heard of what they call the Maritime Silk Road, or the String of Pearls, sometimes it's called. But this is the idea of China being less dependent on trade with maritime trade and more reliant on trade across the landmass. And this is key to Xi Jinping's approach. The second is, so this is part of his approach. The second thing is that his particular idea of power, I mean, he has taken power, Xi Jinping has taken power around himself and the military, and he's created this new thing called a National Security Commission. So he has this style very much of a top-down, kind of, to some extent, a fear-based security system. But in Xinjiang, in the Uyghur area of China, he has some difficulties. I mean, he has a problem. He believes that there is a problem of divided loyalties because of people's religion, and he has difficulties in getting people to go to the province, even though the Han population has increased. I mean, have to remember that 400 million people moved from the countryside to the coastal areas to work in all the factories. I mean, this is the largest migration in human history of these people moving. So here, in the case of the Uyghur lands, he's got the opposite problem. He's trying to get people to go in the opposite direction. And this is a great difficulty. They've had problems with this, and they believe that part of the difficulty they have is perceptions across the rest of China. And even though, I mean, since Mao, I think when Mao was in power, the Uyghur population was about 6%. Now it's about 50%. So you can see that they've had a success with that, but it's costly because they have to give people incentives, and a lot of the infrastructure has to be paid straight out of the state budget, which is causing some difficulties. And finally, they have a need to develop independent energy sources. And this is a great difficulty, especially when the oil and the coal and the gas and so on is imported into China, and they feel that there's a vulnerability there. So they're very keen to try and develop the energy. So it's coal, gas, oil, and then hydropower in the future. And so this is a kind of absolutely key issue. And their planned trade routes from China into Europe go through Xinjiang province and go through the Uyghur lands, which is a difficulty. They even have a planned corridor through Afghanistan down to the Gwadar port in Pakistan, which is staffed and run by Chinese officials and laborers. So this province is absolutely key for the Xi Jinping project, and we have to understand why and what's happening and so on. We have to understand that motivation. And they deploy, I think I can summarize 6 tactics that they use to project their power and this global dominance that they plan. That's fine. One is they wish to weaken Western objections by using a kind of Western war on terror narrative. And you can see in some of the speeches in the UN that they say, you know, we think the West should learn from us about how to re-educate people who are Islamic. Secondly, they have a reform program for the colonial governments. It's more a military flavor now, especially since 2017. They are trying to increase tourism and incentives for people to go there. They are creating a climate of fear with their forced returns to the country, with kidnapped families and this type of thing, and the incarceration program. And finally, and perhaps eyebrow-raising for some of us here, they have this Bingchuan paramilitary organization, which people are members of. And now 1/3 of the entire Han population, about 3 million people, are members of this Bingchuan paramilitary. It's like a sort of reservist thing where people are trained in using weapons and this type of thing. And it's rather disturbing approach, but from a Beijing point of view, it kind of, for them, makes sense. And the last thing I would say really is about we'll obviously come on to more detail, but just say something about the oil and gas business. I mean, they have planned 3 pipelines, one to Central Asia, one coming from East Jungar, one from Ili, and to try and incorporate and bring the Western powers into the system, they are auctioning off exploration blocks for oil. So it's another way of trying to ensure that the kind of Western objections, if you like, to what's going on there are, if you like, not completely quietened, you know, here we are, but are kept down, and they are very conscious of the need, from their point of view, to keep the problem under the radar, so to speak, of the world's media. So we'll come on to many other issues, but that's just a quick fly past the Chinese policy as a context for the rest of our discussions this evening. And thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. That was excellent. Thank you. Our next speaker is Rahima Mahmood. And Rahima is a London-based Uyghur Muslim who is a human rights activist, singer, and translator. Actually, her translation of The Land Drenched in Tears by, and I'm going to try this, Soyungul Chanishev, won English Pen Translation Award. From Rahima, please.
Assalamu alaikum. Good evening, dear friends. I'm very encouraged to see so many people today here and interested in this subject. My name is Rahima Mahmood. I was born in Ghuja, in the north of what was East Turkestan. I was brought up in a large religious family. I was a lecturer in chemistry at Carmel Vocational and Technical College before coming to the UK. I came to the UK in 2000 to study and have lived here ever since. For the last 18 years, I was unable to return to see my family and my beloved homeland because of my involvements in speaking out against the human rights violations imposed on my people by the Chinese government. And my last contact with my brother was in January 2017. He said, "Please leave us to God's hand, and we leave you to God's hand too." He indirectly told me not to contact them anymore. Up till today, I don't know how they are, if they are safe or interned in these so-called re-education camps. I have tried to find more information in every way, but it wasn't possible. Whoever I approached is terrified to get involved, as the political environment is so terrifying. Not long after I spoke to my brother, news about the mass detention of people and the placing them into so-called re-education camps started to emerge. The gruesome details of how people were targeted and criminalized in the claim of cracking down on religious extremism, which in fact apply to all ordinary practicing Muslims. We believe that there are possibly up to 3 million people are held in the camps. As working as an interpreter, I have been involved with various organizations in interviewing people who have been detained in re-education camps or prison. Their accounts about the torture is chilling and horrendous. One person who was released only 3 months ago revealed that there are people kept in detention for over a year before being moved to this so-called re-education camp. I would say it's concentration camp, actually. He said that the place of detention was a nightmare. During his time of detention of over 3 months, he was tortured daily. 60 people were crowded into a 60 square meter cell. His worst humiliation was to have to strip off his clothes in front of everyone else and to walk in a circle in view of the camera. And this was repeated by everyone else every night. Also, every day, when the police siren was sounded, all prisoners in the room had to dive on top of each other and remain there until the siren stopped. And sometimes this could be 30 minutes. When asked why he was arrested, he stated he didn't know. And he believed that because he is Uyghur. There was another detainee who spent nearly a year in 3 different detention centers. He described his ordeal for over 4 hours. He revealed that many innocent people he knew falsely admitted making bombs, despite never having seen a bomb in their life, in order to stop their torture. He described when he was taken into interrogation room, the sound of women and men screaming, which made his legs feel like jelly. The horrific details which he described affected me so deeply that I was unable to sleep for many nights. What we are reading in the papers is only the tip of the iceberg, as there are many more horrendous crimes against humanity taking place at this very moment. This is just an insight to what is happening to the people held in detention and camps, and people who are outside of this establishment are not free of intimidation either, as they are not free of speech, language, dress, eat, drink, and religion. The entire way of Uyghur culture, heritage, and tradition has been taken away from them, including their funeral rites. Since this atrocity, there are many different human rights organizations been reporting from various places. And one of the quite important news came from Bita Winter organization. I recommend people follow them because they have the journalists inside the region. And I just would like to read out some of the latest report, the description about what is happening. Special treatment is reserved for those whose relatives are in detention or live abroad, people like me. The simple act of presenting their ID card against facial recognition software on entry to any building, housing complex, or public area sounds an alarm which brings 4 or 5 armed guards running. An escort to the nearest police station follows. They are questioned aggressively whilst computer checks are run and not released until they are cleared to go free. A simple day trip to mountains or local beauty spot for these people can result in at worst, detention, and at best, being thrown off the public bus they are on and turn away from the resort to find their way home. Driving through town at night has its own gauntlet of the hazards, as motor scooters and cars are funneled through rigorous checks of their contents and drivers and their documents and phones. Whether it be a new system of armed guards pacing the road, new uniforms and weaponry for the elderly bus stop monitors, electrification of school fencing, or increased number of armed security at the school gates, people wonder when it will end. We cannot imagine what they will think of next, said Tursun, a shopkeeper who has so far managed to evade capture. I wake up every morning wondering if this will be my last day of freedom, he said. They could pick me up on any pretext at any time. He spoke of seeing Roundup while coming home from the cinema early one evening, a few weeks before. The police were just taking people off the street and driving them into a large van, he said. Selim, a law student, spoke of hearing a commotion outside his window at midnight one evening. I watched for more than an hour as people piled out of 3 vans and were herded into the police station. There were men shouting, women screaming, and children crying. He said that family members were running off and returning later to bring clothes and provisions for those who had been taken. He mentioned that one room at the front of the building seemed only to contain children. They were all just sitting on chairs and tables in the window, he said. My time is up. I could tell you more about children as well. They're putting young children into so-called loving heart kindergartens. It's also a kind of detention facilities. Thank you for listening, and I really hope that we can get more help. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rahima. That was very moving and very heartbreaking, but also very enlightening. Now, Abdullah, do we have the slides ready? Yeah. Now, from these events, the most common question that arises is, okay, so what are we going to do beyond this? Today, we're going to hear from speakers on from all sorts of perspectives, but then what? So we've put together a presentation at the Cordoba Foundation, just giving you an idea about what we have in mind. Now, we welcome anyone else's ideas, suggestions, remarks, or the such, but this is what we have in mind, so that we're all aware of what we hope to be doing in the course of the next few days, weeks, and months. If I can have the first slide, please. Now, the first thing is we have to make presentations to the British government. We aim to brief the government on the status of the Uyghur and what ought to be done in that respect. We need to demand that the British government address its Chinese counterpart over this issue. And we need to demand that the FCO expresses its condemnation of China's treatment of the Uyghurs to the Chinese ambassador in London. Basically, we must never allow trade and commerce interests to trump human rights. Never. We will also be making presentations to Parliament, to our MPs. We'll be lobbying MPs to express their condemnation of China's oppression of the Uyghurs. We will also be asking them, probably even demanding of them, to raise questions in Parliament over this issue. We will be approaching the APPG, the All-Party Parliamentary Group on China, as well as the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Human Rights over this issue. We also hope, and with the help of some of our friends today, to be launching a legal campaign to pursue legal avenues to prosecute those perpetrating illegal detentions and incarceration of Uyghur Muslims. We need to raise awareness. Many of you who arrived today told me quite openly that we have never heard of this issue. We just saw the poster, and this is why we are here. So basically, we need to raise awareness. If we don't know enough about the case, it's very difficult to defend. It's very difficult to promote. So we aim to hold conferences across the country, do, if you wish, a roadshow in which we address the oppression that the Uyghurs are subject to, and also to brief journalists and bloggers and journalists and writers and commentators and authors on China's treatment of the Uyghurs. Also, we aimed to achieve direct support by connecting the Uyghur community in the UK, and I'm pleased to say that today we have a few of the Uyghur community here with us, not only as speakers but also as guests and attendees of this particular conference. I'm pretty sure that very few of us have ever come to meet someone from the Uyghur community, so today is our chance. So to connect the Uyghur community in the UK and across Europe, to access direct and second-hand testimonies of developments and of, as Rahima put it, the kind of challenges and horrific stories that are being perpetrated every single day. And also, we need to investigate channels through which aid and support to the Uyghurs can be provided. As you all know, it's not the easiest of things to get through to areas almost secluded and closed down by the Chinese government. But we're going to work with charities, international organizations, in order to seek ways to deliver aid, help, support in whatever way and means we can. So that is an idea about what we have in mind as the Cordoba Foundation. We will need your help on two levels. Firstly, this is something that requires support, help, manpower. We need all sorts of help in order to collaborate so that we can deliver this. The second is obviously from the financial perspective. This costs and your help will be appreciated. But also we need your ideas. Those of you who have identified gaps, things that we haven't mentioned in these slides, you think will be somehow important, relevant, influential, effective, please let us know. We have stewards around the hall if you wish to deliver something in writing, or you have our email on all the publications and throughout today, so you are more than welcome to correspond with us. Moving on to our next speaker, it gives me pleasure to welcome Mahmoud Turdi, who's a Uyghur activist who was forced to flee his city of Karamay in 2001 due to ongoing political persecution. After a brief stay in Malaysia, he settled in the UK in 2002, and Mahmoud will be talking about his personal account of persecution. Mahmoud.
My name is Mahmoud Turdi, and Turdi, it means stand up. I was born in that petroleum city, 72, and graduate high school, become a teacher, teaching as a Chinese language, as a second language to the Uyghur children in the primary and the secondary school, and worked 8 years and left the country in 2011 to study. On that prescription, there is some error. I left for study 2011, just after September 11, to Malaysia, and stayed a short while, and I came here with my loved wife together for study, and because I believe the knowledge we need to create animation company and spread, translate all our classical scriptures and make it animation so we can just preserve our culture and spread our culture to the younger generation. But I came here, situation has changed, and so I came to UK 2002 and stayed here 1 year, and 2003 Christmas I left UK with my wife and to married, and we arrived homeland. And after marriage, 2 days after my marriage, I knew there is Chinese security forces behind us. So that is quite usual for Uyghur peoples in there. And they detained me, and just after 2 days after my marriage, and they taken me from my room and taken to a local hotel. I didn't know, after 10 minutes, they also took my wife after 10 minutes after me. So I was interrogated for 2 days because of my identity, because of I came here study, so whom I associated with, whom I saw, what kind of experience I've been here experienced. So then I came here 2000 after they confiscated passport, and hardly I reobtained my passport with my wife and I returned to UK 2004 in March. And since then, there is risk for me because that's why I was forced to migrate, leave to my homeland, and I stayed here since 2004. Now is almost 15 years I haven't returned to my own homeland. My father passed 2015, 3 years ago, and now I am the third in home. My eldest brother detained 2018 January because of I am living overseas, and over the decade my mom, my brother, my sister, my 2 younger brothers, they all been harassed because of I am overseas, and they just pressuring my mom to ask me to return back to China, although I am British citizen, no more Chinese citizen. So they refused to ask me to return to China. That's why 2016, 27th of July, my sister was imprisoned because my sister refused the government to pressurizing me to return to China and hand myself to them. And after my sister, she's been in jail since 2016 July until now, nearly 3 years. And then my brother trying to find my sister's whereabouts. And my brother, because of acting and advocating my sister's right, and he was also detained 2018 in June. I don't know he is released or not. And my younger brother, when I went to China 2003, I saw him in the prison before my marriage. When I left China last time, and I saw him in prison. So in my family, I am the third. My eldest brother, senior automobile engineer. My sister, TV broadcaster, highly graduate, university graduate. They're both in the prison camp now. And my brother, after me, 2 years younger than me, he is also in the prison. And my youngest brother, he's graduate in multimedia and animation in Malaysia private university after 8 years studied. And he's end up in the jail or not. I don't know. 3 years since 2016, July. My communication with my beloved family members all cut off. So no communication at all. The last communication just 1 month ago, I received one picture of my mom's through the third party. And they only sent through the third party to me, no direct communication. And because my family in the Chinese government's blacklist, because I am Uyghur, I am residing in the United Kingdom. I am no more Chinese citizen. So whoever Uyghur identity, born with Uyghur identity, they end up lifelong oppression, persecution. My grandfather, during the 1960s, he was end up in Kazakhstan. The China closed the border. My mom at the time is around 7 years old. My grandfather left in the Kazakhstan, border closed. My mom left 7 years. And I saw, and my mom also saw his own father. After 1991, Kazakhstan regained its independence. And then my grandfather, which means my mother's father, returned to homeland after 30 years separation. I saw him 91 when I was high school, year 3. And he returned to second time, 1995. And then third time, no chance. He died in Kazakhstan. So my mom suffered 30 years separation because of China's policy. He ended up living in Kazakhstan. My mom ended up living in Karamay. And that same scenario happened to me. I ended up separated with my eldest son, 8 years. And he left behind us, he was 3.5 years old. And we end up with him since 2011. And we reunited with my oldest son when he was 11.5 years. He joined us in the UK, in Norwich, 1997, September. He was 11.5 years old at the time. So I thought this would pass with the older generation, but it didn't. It is inherent to me as well. And so this tragedy, because of the China's policy towards the Uyghur peoples, which is indigenous people in that land, still ongoing. China's main reason is unwilling to protect our basic rights. That is the main issue. That's why there is no justice, there is no fair. If there is no justice, no fair around the world, that could attract the rebellion, could attract uprising. So I don't want to see any atrocity or bloodshed in my beloved homeland. But inevitably, that would happen in my homeland. I'm not expert to say when it would happen, but based my 28 years life experience in my own homeland, now I am 46 years. I lived in my homeland 28 years. I've been living in the United Kingdom 17 years. By profession, I am property management officer. I was teacher in my own homeland. So we just appealing to any single individual just to use your freedom, your power to help us to raise, promote our power, freedom, and our rights. You do have that rights, you do have that power. So every single person like a star. So in our history, we are suffering hardest oppression in our life. And I know this is just a challenge for us and for West, for any civilized country and the peoples. So what my appeal is, this is just my one family's story. And every single family has their own very heart-bleeding story. And I hope you can do something to change this atrocity in our Uyghur homeland. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. me a great pleasure to welcome Emily Thornbury. And Emily, most of you will know. I would be surprised if anyone wouldn't know. She's the MP for Islington South and Finsbury, and the Shadow Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs. Now, before tonight, we weren't sure whether Emily would make it, but she kindly, hastily finished her business in the Commons in order to make it to this event with us tonight. So, without further ado, Emily, please.
I stand here before you tonight as a representative of the British Labour Party, and I bring you greetings from Jeremy Corbyn. And I'd like to thank the Cordoba Foundation for arranging this amazing event, and for the East London Mosque for hosting it. I congratulate you, and I congratulate everyone here tonight who have been contributing to what is a very powerful event. I've not heard many of the testimonies given tonight, but the few that I have really touch you in the soul, don't they? And why are we here? We're here because we want to send a simple message, and a simple message that should be shouted loud and clear throughout our country and the world, and that must be heard by China. And our message is this: that we will not stand silent whilst the Uyghur community remains subject to this terrible repression and persecution, all done to them simply because they want to practice their Muslim faith. And what we see today in China is hundreds of thousands in mass detention, hundreds of thousands facing cultural re-education and psychological indoctrination, a whole people facing systematic oppression and brutal violence. It is something that we associate with Cambodia 40 years ago, or China 50 years ago, in other countries down the decades and centuries where abhorrent prejudice based on religion, based on race, based on skin color had been allowed to flourish unchallenged. But for that to be happening today, 2 decades into the 21st century, in a country that has a permanent seat on the Security Council, that is not just abhorrent, it is unacceptable, and it cannot be tolerated any longer. And one of the reasons we need to raise awareness of this issue now and make it clear that it cannot continue is that, as we know, it has been getting worse over the past 5 years, and it is getting worse as we speak, driven by State Secretary Chan. The number of Uyghurs currently being detained in re-education centres is at least 1 million people, detained for reasons as straightforward as regularly attending the mosque. Increasing reports of torture, of abuse, of deaths, and even organ harvesting have emerged from the camps. So what can be done? Well, clearly, it is important that we maintain public condemnation of the treatment of the Uyghurs and support the call of the UN for the Chinese authorities to shut down the re-education camps now. We need the UK government to continue to use intergovernmental forums to apply pressure on the Chinese. And here in the UK, it is imperative that we prevent the deportation of Uyghur asylum seekers back to China, and we must expedite asylum applications from Uyghur Muslims. And one option that the government didn't have a year ago to use is the Majinsky powers that Labour has ensured can be passed into law this year. And what they do is they can impose sanctions against individuals who are abusing human rights. And the first in line should be State Secretary Chen. And the private sector, in my view, also has a role. It has a role to play, and it can do this. We must urge any companies that are operating in Xinjiang province to end any business operations that are contributing to human rights abuses. And the British government must also consider implementing export controls on surveillance technology that is being used by the provincial authorities to oppress and to monitor Uyghur Muslims. But whatever we do, we need to act fast. China may be an important trading partner, and it is. And it is a vital player in the world. But that is all the more reason to demand that they act on human rights abuses. We must not turn a blind eye to the glaringly obvious. And frankly, what is happening now is glaringly obvious. What was claimed to be an attempt to target extremism and terrorism has morphed into something horrendously different, where the only thing that is being targeted is those who practice the Muslim faith. In other words, it's the same old story, my friends. It's the same old lie. The lie is of us and of them, the normal and the other. And as soon as people start to think that way anywhere in the world, and as soon as a state starts to act in that way and divide people in that way, we are on a very slippery and dangerous slope. And frankly, we are already a long way down that slope in China. So, now is the time for us to say, enough is enough. Now is the time to tell China that this must stop. And now is the time to ensure that Uyghur people can practice their faith in peace. Because we know this to be true. And we have to say this clearly. There is no them, and there is no other. There is only us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily. That was very powerful. Thank you. And our thanks and gratitude also to Jeremy and all your team. I mean, this is just before the break. I presented to you what we thought at the Cordoba Foundation as a campaign in order to build some sort of momentum, build some sort of influence and effect in order to highlight this case, but also bring some real changes in the way that the Uyghur people are being treated. And Emily's presence and her words are extremely helpful in that particular guise, so thank you very much. Our next speaker is from East Turkestan. He is an accomplished poet, an independent scholar, secretary, PEN International Uyghur Center, researcher at the Uyghur Meshrab in Kazakhstan Project, University of London. Please welcome Aziz Isa Elkon, who's going to speak on China's ethnic cleansing of the Uyghur from oppression to cultural genocide.
Assalamu alaikum. First of all, I appreciate for today's event my deep thanks to the Cordoba Foundation and other cooperated NGO organizations. Thank you very much. Chinese ethnic cleansing of Uyghurs from oppression to cultural genocide. Today's Uyghur problem in China is arguably one of the most serious crimes that a country has openly committed against a specific ethnicity after the Second World War II. And it's not a new problem, but an old unsolved one. So, who are the Uyghurs and where do they live? Today, according to the China census, over 12 million Uyghurs live in East Turkestan along with other small number of Turkic people like Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, and Uzbeks. The region is today officially known as the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region of China. Its territory includes over 1,800,000 square kilometer land, which is bigger than whole Western Europe or 7 times bigger than the United Kingdom's territory. Its strategic location lies in the heart of the ancient Silk Road. If anyone could mute the slideshow, would be Kemsa follow the maps and follow my presentation. Okay, good. Yeah, this map shows the location. So there's many questions asking why today's cultural genocide from oppression to today's level. Why China committing such an atrocity to a specific ethnicity? Let me give you brief reasons why China is doing that. The last surviving Uyghur independent state, the Saidia Uyghur Kingdom collapsed in the 17th century after factional wars. During the Great Game in Central Asia between British, Russia, and China, East Turkestan became a political and geographical competing point between these three empires. In 1884, East Turkestan was fully occupied by China and renamed as Xinjiang, which means new dominions in Chinese language. There were numerous incidents of resistance and rebellion against the Chinese occupation in the 19th and 20th centuries. Uyghurs established a short-lived Islamic Republic of East Turkestan in Kashgar in 1933. That's the first Islamic Republic established in the world in modern time. A second East Turkestan Republic was established in Ghuja in 1945 with the support of the Soviet Union. But 5 years later, the Uyghurs once more sold out by foreign powers. In 1949, all the Uyghur leaders were killed in a staged plane crash which was ordered by the Soviet KGB and Stalin. The Soviet Union sent their tanks and warplanes to assist the occupation of East Turkestan by Chinese Red Army. In 1949, the People's Republic of China was established, and it inherited the rule over the colonized territories of East Turkestan, Tibet, and southern Mongolia. In 1955, China announced the establishment of the so-called Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, but this autonomous status was never fully implemented. Since then, Uyghurs have experienced various forms of oppression under the regime. China has previously used measures of forced assimilations similar to those we are seeing today. During the Cultural Revolution, which is in the 1970s, Uyghur culture and religion was attacked, mosques were destroyed, Qurans were burned, and many people were imprisoned. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1990s, the Uyghurs witnessed their ethnic kin people like Kazakh, Kyrgyz, Uzbek people achieve their independence. Therefore, aspiration for independence grew and systematic resistance against the Chinese rule developed among the wider Uyghur population. After 1990s, China introduced a series of hard strike campaigns designed to counter Uyghur aspirations, but Uyghurs never stopped demanding their legitimate civil and human rights within China. The regime maintained control by cracking down brutally on local forms of community organization. For example, in 1997, Ghuja Massacre was one of the most serious of Chinese atrocities in the region. 22 years ago, in Ghuja, a group of Uyghur who organized makeshift Uyghur cultural activity were arrested, and Uyghurs demonstrated against their arrest, and the Chinese army openly fired on the peaceful demonstrators. China has tried to legitimize its suppression of Uyghurs in various ways, but after September 11 terror attack in the USA, China used the war on terror as a reason for its oppression of Uyghurs because they are being a Muslim. Now, building police stations, then concentration camps. The political situation of the Uyghurs has become much worse under Xi Jinping. In 2016, he brought Chen Quanguo from Tibet to East Turkestan, gave him sweeping powers to suppress Uyghur resistance and forced assimilations by all means. These policies started in 2016 in the guise of anti-terror campaign, which aimed to eradicate Uyghur ethnic, cultural, religious identity and existence, banning Uyghur language schools and closing down mosques. To eradicate resistance, Chen Quanguo began to build one police station every 100 meters, just like he did in Tibet before 2016. Since early 2017, Uyghurs in East Turkestan have been forbidden to receive telephone calls from their relatives abroad. All communication for the Uyghurs was cut off. For example, I don't know whereabouts my elderly mother. She's 76 years old, and I am the only child of the family. My father died 2017. I have spoken to her nearly 2 years now. In 2017, Chen Quanguo started building large-scale concentration camps. Now it's estimated that between 1 to 3 million innocent Uyghurs, including writers, academics, teachers, farmers, all kept in these camps. There's a report from ABC News Agency on 31st of October 2018. On the report said, despite the mass scale of the camps examined in this project, it's likely they make up just a fraction of the detention networks in Xinjiang. Estimates of camps numbers range anywhere between 181 to upwards 1,200. And the largest camps or prison ever a country built, which can hold one camp, for example, can hold up to 10,000 people. There are reports of many deaths came out from the camps. We have heard many witness statements from the camp residents like Umer Bekali. If any, this will be a video show. Okay, it's not moving actually, so not, all right. And this reveals serious atrocities towards camp inmates. There are also video clips secretly filmed in the camps that have spread on social media. Now, many Western media have reported on the concentration camps, and the national governments and UN have raised concern. Shamelessly, even at the UN sessions, Chinese government officials have denied their crimes against humanity. China described these prisons as vocational training centers, but we call them concentration camps of China in the 21st century, where China is committing cultural and ethnic genocide against the Uyghur people. We ask the world, and of course ask from you, to say no to China and China's ethnic cleansing of the Uyghurs before it's late. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was excellent. Thank you. Now, in our presentation about the campaign that the Cordoba Foundation wishes to run, I highlighted a very important aspect which we gave an entire slide to, and that was the legal campaign. And it gives me great pleasure to have with us a dear friend who's been supporting campaigns regarding human rights abuses and violations all around the world. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome Rodney Dixon QC, who's an international human rights lawyer from Temple Garden Chambers, an associated independent counsel at Stoke White. His expertise includes foreign relations, interstate disputes, the armed forces, international prosecutions and defense, universal jurisdiction and extradition. Rodney will be talking about legal avenues to prosecuting those behind illegal detentions and incarcerations. Rodney.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm pleased that you wish to hear about some of the legal options. I think they are vital in examining if there's to be justice and accountability in the short term and certainly in the longer term as well. We have discussed many of the political avenues that can be followed. These are obviously important to build pressure, but I think it's equally important that alongside that, legal avenues are pursued wherever they can be. They are not very easy roads to travel. There are many obstacles, and those who you're seeking to prosecute will try and stop them at all costs, as will their friends and others who have interests. So the challenges are enormous, but there certainly are legal steps that can be taken, and they have been proven in many cases to produce results. Even if they take time or there are many difficulties, they certainly generate pressure in and of themselves. And from my experience, a lot of media attention. So they go hand in hand with the efforts that are launched by politicians and activists and NGOs to take action. They can be used very effectively to highlight the suffering, which we've heard tonight, and in many, many other testimonies and reports as well, but also to seek to scrutinize those who are responsible and to bring them to justice, if not now, then sometime in the future, and to make it clear that that will happen. That can have a deterrent effect. It can stop crimes that are being committed. It can make people think twice. But most importantly, it can send a message to all in the world that these practices are unacceptable and there will be serious consequences in the future. If people think there are no consequences, if they can get away with it entirely, they will definitely keep perpetrating. But when they realize that there are risks, if they are traveling around the world, if they are engaged in business, there are risks to themselves, to their finances, to their interests, they will certainly begin to think twice about it. But that's only part of the reason. It's also there for the victims so that they can get a degree of justice as far as is possible, and to be able to reconcile with themselves and to rebuild their lives as far as one can for the future. So it's a very important aspect of any campaign, the legal aspect. There is plainly a wealth of evidence which goes to show mass international crimes have been committed against the Uyghur people. This is not only recorded in the testimonies, we've heard some tonight, but in UN reports like the UN report from the UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination that came out at the end of last year, a very hard-hitting report that has allowed the Human Rights Commissioner and Human Rights Council to raise questions, and has even got a response from China potentially allowing access or a visit in the future. Obviously, there are conditions that are seeking to be imposed, but it's through that kind of evidence gathering that some progress has been made that allows for a further platform and momentum to take this forward. So there's a wide range of evidence out there already. Much of it is quite dispersed. It needs to be brought together. It needs to be concentrated. Further evidence needs to be gathered so that it is forensically as strong as possible. When we talk about legal cases, we do have to bear in mind that it's critical to get the best first-hand evidence which shows the crimes, but also because that will attract the attention of the wider audience and build the pressure to prosecute. The power of embarrassing people when there are no prosecutions given overwhelming evidence should never be underestimated. People need to be embarrassed into investigating and prosecuting these crimes worldwide. So the evidence is there to address the crimes over which various courts have jurisdiction. There's no doubt about it that it needs to be refined and packaged and made strong. That is the key. I want to then focus on, in my time, 3 areas where international prosecutions and national initiatives could be taken as well. The first is the permanent International Criminal Court in The Hague and other international criminal courts. The second is evidence gathering and preservation mechanisms. And the last is national prosecutions. The ICC, China is not signed up, but there are other jurisdictional routes that should be considered. We've seen the prosecutor in the Rohingya case go outside of the country that was the main perpetrator that's not signed up. There's some precedent there. These options need to be looked at, and the prosecutor herself can take steps to look to try and get jurisdiction. A Security Council referral or consent of the key parties. There are also options through hybrid courts, like we saw with the Cambodia court. Those would happen through the General Assembly and UN structures. A lot of political pressure would have to be built for that to happen. Secondly, if there's a problem with getting consent, like there is in the Yemen, like there is in Syria in the Security Council, the General Assembly can act. It has established a evidence preservation and gathering mechanism for Syria, the IIIM. Those kind of routes could be looked at for the Uyghur situation as well. Also for the Uyghur situation, you could look at what has happened in Yemen. The UN Human Rights Council establishing a body of experts to gather the evidence, to keep it ready for prosecution. These are mechanisms that have developed recently, innovative mechanisms that should be looked at. There are also many special procedures at the UN bodies in Geneva that can be employed. Lastly, national prosecutions. Many countries, including the UK, have universal jurisdiction. So even if the crimes don't take place here, if anyone travels here as an alleged perpetrator, they could be investigated and prosecuted. Private prosecutions are also possible. Many countries have these options in Europe, in North America, and civil options are available as well. All of those should be explored when perpetrators are moving around. The business sector as well, Emily highlighted this earlier, that is another place because of UN guidelines that compliance regulations can be looked at, and where those are breached, there could be investigations. All of these, I've gone through them rapidly, are concrete options that exist and they can be developed. We must not think that legal avenues are closed just because China hasn't signed treaties or not signed up to bodies. There are ways of doing it, but one has to be creative and very determined. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rodney, and we'll definitely be working with you closely on this issue in the coming days, weeks, and months. Our next speaker is a British Hong Kong journalist and TV and radio presenter who's done this for many years. Former Chinese University in Hong Kong, senior lecturer and founder of Journalism Educators for Press Freedom. Please welcome Yuan Chan.
Good evening, everybody. Quite a few people tonight have mentioned that they didn't know about the plight of the Uyghurs before tonight, and they asked the question, which is, why didn't I know about this? Why hasn't it been reported? Why is it not on our radar? So the question that I wanted to address tonight is exactly that question, and to try and provide some context by trying to explain how information, news, and the media are controlled in the People's Republic of China that has contributed to why you didn't know about the plight of the Uyghurs before tonight. So a very brief overview of the way that the Chinese Communist Party controls media and information in the country. Some of you might be surprised to hear that Article 35 of the Chinese Constitution actually states that the citizens of the People's Republic of China enjoy freedom of speech, of the press, of assembly, of association, of procession, and of demonstration. Sounds pretty good, right? So that is actually enshrined in the Constitution. And yet, in reality, according to Reporters Without Borders, World Press Freedom Index, China actually ranked 176th out of 180 countries for press freedom last year. And recent figures show that China has 47 journalists in jail. One of the recent ones being a very famous award-winning photographer called Lu Guang, who was arrested after being invited by friends to share about his photography experiences in Urumqi. According to the Committee for the Protection of Journalists, there were 41 journalists behind bars in 2017, of whom 13 were Uyghurs, okay? So despite the promises in the constitution, in reality, the ruling Communist Party maintains a very, very tight grip on Chinese domestic media, as well as Chinese media organizations working overseas, including in the UK. And in recent years, because China has become more powerful, become more economically strong, it's been expanding what people call its influence operations abroad, and that has included lots of deals struck with Western media organizations. So you will see articles in the Daily Mail that are in cooperation with Chinese state media. You will also see inserts in the Washington Post, which are produced by the China Daily, which is a Communist Party mouthpiece. So in China, basically, information is controlled via a vast and very sophisticated propaganda infrastructure, which under President Xi Jinping has been given even more powers over every aspect of news, information, culture, and entertainment. That includes films and TV series. Some of you may be aware, for instance, that Winnie the Pooh is banned in China because of his apparent resemblance to Xi Jinping. All Chinese media organizations are basically regularly given directives by propaganda officials to warn them on what they can and cannot report. And even when they can actually report on something, sometimes they're given instructions on precisely how they should do it. And this often means that they can only carry dispatches from the official Xinhua news agency. Journalists working in China have always been aware that there are red lines that they cannot cross. And some very principled and skilled journalists have been able to very skillfully skirt these red lines in order to get as much news and information as they can without the censors cutting their story altogether. This is at least since the opening and reform period anyway. And what we used to see was that it was cyclical. So control would loosen up and then tighten, loosen up and then tighten, depending on the general environment. What we've seen since at least 2014, when Xi Jinping took power, is that, in fact, that cycle seems to have sort of, that there's no upside right now, and we can't see any. And in fact, the period that we're going through right now is one that many Chinese journalists actually describe as the dark ages for media freedom in the post-reform era. And this, ironically, also comes at a time when there are more people online than ever before in China, when there is actually more information. If we're not discerning about the quality of that information, there is actually more information than ever before. But also at a time when the government has managed to harness technology to censor, restrict, and manipulate news and information in increasingly comprehensive and sophisticated ways. And what does that mean? That means that it's become harder to produce any reporting that allows for context and that may allow audiences to gain an understanding of issues and events that may deviate from the government's official narrative. And the reason that I mention that is because it means that the majority of people in China, people outside of Xinjiang, but in China, it's hard for them to access accurate information that challenges the official view of anything. And it's become harder both to report and for audiences to receive that information. So I mentioned red lines. Some red lines are always very clear, despite these kind of tightening and loosening of restrictions. And these are concerns that the issues that the party state sees as core to the survival of the regime and to national security, which they see as synonymous, actually. So this would be anything to do with national security, anything to do with sovereignty, territorial integrity, okay? So what does this mean? In reality, that means anything to do with Tibet, with Taiwan, with Xinjiang, with the South China Sea and the disputed islands, and even increasingly now with Hong Kong. And this also comes at a time when the party has really stepped up efforts in its propaganda to give the world the impression that there is only one way of being Chinese, right? So, and that means the Han way and the way that speaks the Putonghua version of Chinese. So, in fact, that, you know, I think what people forget is that there are so many different languages and ethnicities and cultures in China. There is no one singular Chinese culture or one singular Chinese language, right? So that's sort of a background to how the domestic media is controlled. So you'll say, well, how come I haven't heard about this through the mainstream media? I've heard people talking about tonight about we haven't seen the story in the mainstream media. In reality, actually, since at least 2017, there has actually been a lot of reporting about the detentions and the repression in the mainstream media, right? Despite it being very, very difficult to report. So the FCC of China issued an annual report at the end of last year, in which many reporters said that these were the worst reporting conditions they'd encountered in more than 20 years, okay? So out of the foreign journalists who were interviewed, nearly half of them said they had directly experienced human surveillance, okay? 22% said that they were aware of authorities having tracked them using public surveillance, and 50% of the respondents said that surveillance had impacted their reporting. It's no surprise that some of the worst surveillance and interference occurred when international media tried to report in Xinjiang. Of the 26 reporters who said that they'd taken at least one reporting trip to the region, all but 3 reported experiencing interference. 96% said they were visibly followed. 79% were asked to or forced to delete their data. 63% had their interviews monitored. 58% were detained or had one of their colleagues detained. 58% were physically blocked from access to public areas. The really heavy-handed tactics to prevent reporters from doing their jobs, including, you know, searching their hotel rooms and confiscating materials. One correspondent from Canada's Globe and Mail newspaper reported on how he was followed and tracked for nearly 1,600 kilometers by at least 9 cars and 20 people, okay? You know, they were surrounded by armed police with shields and told to raise their hands and put their hands up outside the car. You know, this is for the crime of reporting, okay? So, so this is another way that they can intimidate is that actually international media working in China often have Chinese staff, including translators and news assistants, excuse me. And it's become very difficult for these people working for foreign media because they are told in the rhetoric now, this very nationalistic kind of rhetoric, that they are traitors, right? And that they are showing their country in a bad light. Some of them have been detained, been intimidated, and threatened, okay? So the reporting, so when you wonder why you haven't heard more, these are some of the conditions that make it really difficult for good, accurate, on-the-ground reporting. Okay, so the other thing is journalists have been expelled. Okay, so journalists have been expelled, not being given visas in order for their reporting in Xinjiang. But what I did want to say, or I would like to end with, is that it's really important to keep telling the story, okay? It's only because of the determination and persistence of reporters, activists, scholars, and researchers that we now do have some idea of what's going on. And I do want to flag up the Radio Free Asia, RFA's Uyghur service journalists who have done an amazing job in the face of incredible pressure and intimidation and detention, in fact, of their own families. So there are truth tellers out there who are telling the story, and we should always support truth tellers, journalists doing their work. And we've already seen changes, in fact. If it were not for those reports and not for the international criticism that followed those reports, China wouldn't even have acknowledged and admitted that there were these detention camps. If it were not for the reports about Abdurrahim Hayat, the famous Uyghur musician, they wouldn't have released the video, which, while terrible, at least confirms that he was detained and what he was detained for. And these things would not have happened without international outcry and without reporting. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Yuan. That was excellent. Thank you. Our next speaker needs no introduction. He's someone we all know very, very well. The Muslim Council of Britain has been a great supporter of this cause and has spoken already and issued statements regarding this particular catastrophe. And therefore, our next speaker is someone I have great pleasure in introducing to you, Harun Khan, the General Secretary of the Muslim Council of Britain, who will speak about UK Muslims and the Uyghur.
Assalamu alaikum and good evening, sisters and brothers, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to you all for coming tonight to tonight's public meeting. As the Secretary General of the Muslim Council of Britain, I'm honored to address you all and discuss this incredibly pressing and important issue. Our responsibility as Muslims to respond to the injustices that happen around us is heightening every single day. Every single day, we hear more reports and more witness statements that the Uyghur Muslims and other ethnic minorities in Xinjiang are being oppressed in the most brutal way. Imagine the place that you have always lived turning against you. Imagine you are no longer allowed to speak your mother tongue, the language of your people in public. Imagine that even when you do speak, it is with the fear and self-censorship in a climate of intense surveillance. Imagine hiding pages of the Quran in your freezer so that you don't fall foul of random checks. Imagine knowing that physical and psychological torture await you in secretive re-education camps, should you be picked off the streets and detained for no reason. Now imagine that all of this is state-sanctioned, legal and practiced by the government. For Uyghur Muslims in the Xinjiang region, this is a reality that has been ongoing for decades now. Little by little, we've seen the flames of bigotry fanned higher and higher, to the point where up to 1 million of our fellow Muslims are being held in re-education camps. That's nearly 10% of the entire Uyghur Muslim population in Xinjiang. Recently, we've seen a swell of damning reports from activists, journalists, as we've heard, human rights organizations, and political leaders in the UN. But how did we get to this position today? Are we ignorant of the Chinese government's campaign against Islamic practices? Is this the first time we've heard that there's a crackdown on Uyghurs practicing their faith? No, it isn't. So how many of us are able to empathize and do everything in our power to stop it? I know it can feel disempowering for many reasons: distance, capacity, power, and resource. I feel this too, on a personal level. All of us question our role and ability to do something to help. But we have many instances in our history to reflect on. When prophets and people of God have felt powerless but have continued. When it feels as though we have no power to change the situation, we have to remind ourselves it starts with intention and a small action. So let me tell you, when people come together, be they Muslim or not, for a just cause, to protest injustice and to struggle for what is right, that very act can be the most empowering message. if we loudly refuse to accept injustice, then those who suffer it know that they are not alone. If we recognize and support our Uyghur brothers and sisters, if we dismantle the barriers that are designed to stop us from recognizing their humanity, then we have started to break down the propaganda. That tells Uyghurs to conform to a nationalistic vision that denies their rich heritage. I want to set out a few things that we can focus on. We're very privileged to be living in the UK, where we can voice our concerns openly. Let us take advantage of this privilege that isn't afforded to our Uyghur brothers and sisters. Firstly, let's educate ourselves. Reach out to any Uyghur Muslims who may be living or working in our local area. You can contact Rahima and others who have built a small community in London and ask what is needed. Donate your time, skills, and energy to the ongoing efforts. Secondly, use mosques, centers, and institutions as places to gather and show support. Talk about Uyghur Muslims in the Jummah khutbah, the Friday prayers, but go further and organize meetings afterwards to run local actions. These actions can be anything from a small protest to a large public event with speakers and human rights activists. Thirdly, use lobbying power. We at the Muslim Council of Britain have written to the Chinese Embassy and the Foreign and Commonwealth Office to ask exactly what they're doing in response to the reports. The FCO have told us that they've raised the recommendations put forward by the UN Committee for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. So we know that there are people in government willing to raise this issue. Keep the pressure on and ask them to go further. Fourthly, use social media and mainstream media to raise awareness. It is up to us to keep this issue on the agenda. Keep tweeting, writing, take part in online campaigns, and always seek out Uyghur Muslims whose voices should be amplified. Finally, keep talking amongst each other and renewing our intentions. Accompany everything you do with sincerity and prayer. In almost all struggles against injustice, it is civil society, everyday ordinary people who must stand up and bear witness and act for change. Let us take on this responsibility for those who cannot. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much, Harun. That was excellent. Thank you. Last but certainly not least, Louise Pine-Jones is the head of research at the International Observatory of Human Rights, a supporting organization of this event. Her academic work focuses on religious and colonial ideologies. She's a contributor to the First World War and its aftermath, the shaping of the Middle East. Very importantly, she's going to talk about what we can do. Louise.
Well, thank you, first of all, for inviting us to be here to talk on this topic of great importance. First, before I talk about what you can do and what we can all do, I'd like to just talk a bit, obviously, about what we do as an organization and just some background. So the International Observatory of Human Rights, or IOHR, we do something a little bit different with human rights. We take these issues, such as the plight of the Uyghurs, and we bring it to an audience that may not have heard about it, just everyday people. I think this is important because there's a real heavy reliance on mainstream media as a source of sort of basic everyday knowledge, which means that there are a lot of human rights violations that go untouched in the media, as we've heard from many of the other speakers as well. So what we're doing at IOHR is to create awareness through a multimedia platform that we've developed, and it includes a TV channel. And we're creating awareness about issues such as this. We actually currently have as well an episode about the Uyghurs that's up online at the moment. So, talking personally as somebody who is really interested in history and has written quite a bit about history, I'm always looking at the connections of the past and the present. And sadly, it often seems that the mistakes of the past were made, but that we're not really learning from those mistakes in the present at all. The current persecution of the Uyghur people is a clear example of how humanity has not learned from its past. It almost seems as though some governments or authorities want to replicate great tragedies of the past, even down to the techniques that are used to rid this community of its cultural identity. So the persecution of the Uyghurs and the attempt to wipe out their culture is now, fortunately, starting to become better well documented. So again, thinking about history, I think it's really important to look at what violations such as these mean in the wider world context. And this is, again, a lot of the work that we do at our organization and a lot of NGOs do on a daily basis. So at the moment, if we look at the world, it does seem to obviously be following this kind of rise of nationalism and populism across the board, whether we're talking about President Trump in the US or we're talking about Bolsonaro in Brazil, we're talking about Orban in Hungary, and even, here on our doorstep in the UK with the rise of the right-wing and populist parties and individuals. It's really even harder to fight the wiping out of identities and, the plights of people and communities such as the Uyghurs when we have so many influential political figures and media organizations that seem to give these ideas a vast platform from which to actually be divisive. So what's happening to the Muslim Uyghurs has been and is referred to as a cultural genocide. But what does this actually mean? Cultural genocide is considered a component of genocide, and it's a strategy that's used by authorities to destroy a community's cultural heritage. It's usually done through forced assimilation, dispossession of land, destruction of buildings and artifacts or symbols that are meaningful to that group of people. So it's quite often a psychological effect as well as a damaging effect. And as we know, the case of the Uyghurs, there have been many examples of forced assimilation. We all know the details of things, and you've heard some of the stories of individuals as well that people have been faced with, the destruction of mosques, the destruction of religious artifacts as well. So just to talk a little bit about China as well, as some of the other speakers have, the response of China has been so far to claim that these violations are in the name of clamping down on terrorism. The Chinese media have reported, I just have a quote from the Global Times here, which is a Chinese media agency, says that the facilities are useful for anti-terrorism and counter-extremism efforts when talking about these re-education camps. They say that those held at the training centres had been brainwashed by extremism or committed misdemeanours. Again, this is a position that's used for political gain time and time again all over the world. We see states choosing political gain and economic gain over the human rights of individuals and communities. States around the world have also used this call of terrorism to clamp down on civil society and press freedoms. Labelling any group or individual this way gives government the kind of power, or authorities the power, to repress freedoms. Even here in the UK, we are subject to a more subtle form of this repression of our rights through policies that are aimed at fighting terrorism. So what can we actually do to change perspectives on this? I don't purport at all to have the solution for this far-reaching phenomenon, but I think that it really does start with dialogue. It starts with engagement, and it starts with knowledge sharing at a community level, at events just like this, where we can talk, meet each other, and learn knowledge and share, create awareness. And we can then take that debate to a wider level internationally and at a national level as well, through the media, through NGOs, and to the government. So at IOHR, just to give you a summary of what we're calling for in this situation, we're calling on the Chinese authorities to, one, to close the internment re-education camps and immediately release all of those held in arbitrary detention. We're calling, secondly, for the Chinese authorities to reveal the names, the whereabouts, the current status of all of those who have been subjected to enforced disappearance. We're asking for them to cease the policies of forced cultural assimilation and social re-engineering, the cultural genocide that I was talking about, that's focused on the Uyghurs, also on the Tibetans and the Southern Mongolians and other groups in China as well. And we're calling on them to allow access for independent investigators to visit and monitor the region. Without having access to the region, we cannot ascertain, real numbers and real cases fully in order for there to be due legal process. We're also currently working with MPs here in the UK to raise these issues in Parliament, in the Lords and the Commons, and to ensure that they're subsequently addressed by the Chinese authorities. So we would like to invite you to join us in our call to stop the indiscriminate human rights violations carried out by China on the Uyghur people now. So thank you once again for the organisers for having us here today.
Thank you very much, Louise. Very much appreciated. At the very end, I can only thank all our speakers throughout this evening who have made it here in order to raise awareness regarding the issue of the Uyghur, to bring to our attention the various avenues that we can all pursue in order to bring some sort of pressure and change to how they are treated. And also, thank you to each and every one of you. It's great that we had this event today, this public meeting, and your presence, your help, your assistance, your ideas, your thoughts, your contribution is very much valued. We hope to replicate this event throughout the country in the next few weeks, and hopefully all of you will be alerted in this regard. Last week, there was a rally in front of the Chinese embassy. Unfortunately, it wasn't a very big one, but it was a starter. And hopefully the next one will be far, far bigger, just so that everyone knows. Now, just a few announcements before I wrap up. First of all, the Insight magazine that you all saw. Those of you who think of people at work, at your mosques, at your centers, in your family, take as many as you would like, and give them out. There are buckets for donations for this campaign as well as for the cause. So please make some sort of a contribution on your way out. The live stream videos, they will come available very, very shortly. So once they do come to your attention, please share them as widely as possible and get in touch with the Cordoba Foundation with any ideas, any remarks, what you heard today, the campaign that we showed you, we are presuming and we are proposing to carry out. If you have any ideas in how to make this better, more comprehensive, then please let us have it. And finally, once again, thank you to everyone who has made it today. I appreciate you. My name is Anas Al-Tikriti. It's been a pleasure hosting this event. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Thank you.